right,
there we go.
Done. All right.
Hi.
Hey,
This is Jeffrey Wernick.
They
with,
don't teach you this at Harvard Law School, how to unlock a video.
This is Jeffrey Wernick, and he welcomed here, of course, Bruce Fein for Fein Points, Dennis Kucinich, and Ryan Cristian. I'm going to make a very brief introduction, and since when we're going to be starting now, some people say the Supreme Court was never out of session, so they're just now formally in session, as opposed to just be doing things through the shadow docket or whatever people want to now refer to it, but they seem to be permanently in session whenever Trump needs them. So I'm going to start off just with some one quote from Murray Rothbard and one quote from John C. Calhoun. Murray Rothbard, in reviewing a book about judicial review, made this comment: "Now, judicial review, beloved by conservatives, can of course fulfill the excellent function of declaring government interventions and tyrannies unconstitutional. But it can also validate and legitimize the government in the eyes of the people by declaring these actions valid and constitutional. Thus, the courts and the Supreme Court become an instrument of spearheading and confirming federal tyranny instead of the reverse. And this is what has happened in America, so that the Constitution itself has been changed from a limiting to an aggrandizing and legitimizing instrument." That's Murray Rothbard. John C. Calhoun said, "To maintain the ascendancy of the Constitution over the lawmaking majority is the great and essential point on which the success of the American system must depend. Unless that ascendancy can be preserved, the necessary consequence must be that the laws will supersede the Constitution, and finally, the will of the executive, by influence of its patronage, will supersede the laws." That's John C. Calhoun. So I think that's both pretty prophetic with respect to what I think our current circumstances are today.
Jeffrey, could I give some historical perspective here? And I apologize a little bit, but I think that we need to recognize, the Supreme Court's been in existence for 230 some years. At best, the court has been speed bumps, slowing majorities, but they've never been a permanent obstacle. They did it at a time under Roosevelt in limiting the scope of the Commerce Clause, but they ultimately bent. And we see it in the current court with Trump versus United States, the limitless executive immunity. The court simply has never resisted simple majorities for very long. And indeed, in the famous Brown against the Board case overruling Plessy and Ferguson, the court acted after already Harry Truman had desegregated the armed forces. Both Republicans and Democrats had civil rights platforms in their institutions. And indeed, even at that time, they issued a decree that said, with all deliberate speed, which ended up being like 15 years. And it took, during that period, Eisenhower to send troops into Little Rock, Arkansas, to desegregate Central High School. So I think it's an overstatement to suggest that the court ultimately is our salvation to defend the Constitution. I think we need to recognize that it's Congress, those like Dennis, who sat and felt he had an oath to support and defend the Constitution, through the impeachment power, is the only way we really vindicate limits on the executive branch. And the reason why it's imperative is that Congress, in exercising the impeachment power, there's no judicial review, the executive is uninvolved, it's uniquely and exclusively congressional operation. And if the Congress is not going to back up Supreme Court decisions with defending defiances, changing statutes or remedies, I can guarantee you it's a fool's errand to think it's the court that's going to save us. And as you point out, Jeffrey, you just look at these shadow orders in the interim. The court is not saving us from executive despotism. In fact, it's kind of ratifying executive despotism by affirmatively approving what Mr. Trump is doing, not just having hands off. It does what Robert Jackson acknowledged in the famous or infamous Korematsu case. The precedent lies around like a loaded weapon, ready for use by any occupant of the White House, claiming some national urgency. And Justice Jackson in that case said, listen, it's better for us to do nothing than to affirm despotism. The court didn't take that advice, unfortunately, but that's what we confront today. But I want our audience to know, if we're going to save the Constitution, it's in Congress's hands ultimately, not the courts.
If I could dovetail to what Bruce just brought up, and referring to Jeffrey's introduction about the role of the courts as an effective check and balance. The fact is, we have to remember that, these are political appointees, and they're confirmed by a political process, whether they're acceptable to the majority that is in the U.S. Senate. And that's the first thing to remember. This idea that somehow they're sitting in lofty positions, immune from politics, is false. The fact is, it's very political. Now, do people, when they get to the court, sometimes not reflect the popular prejudice or popular sentiment? Yes, that's true too. But there's something. So we know, just to be clear, that a court that it seems to be responsive to the political prejudice of the moment, that's not a new matter in American politics. You can go back to the execrable 1857 Dred Scott versus Sanford case, where the Supreme Court under Justice Taney, I think the vote was 6-2, essentially ruled that someone who was a Black African who happened to be in America couldn't be a citizen and wasn't entitled to couldn't enjoy the rights and the privileges that were accorded in the Constitution. So the whole thing about our system is it has the capacity to evolve, but it also may be stuck. And the Dred Scott decision has rippled through the decades and its implications for American politics. So I just want to say, as I wrap up my initial statement here, that you're right, Bruce. Congress can be the ultimate check. It's not going to do that now. This becomes another issue when people vote. If the public can be made aware of how momentous these individual votes are on Supreme Court nominees, but the courts will tend to reflect prevailing prejudices, and there aren't going to be many justices that we will hope arise to show a path towards a future that really does protect the Constitution. And just a buzzer shot here, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when the Insurrection Act and posse comitatus gets to this court, to see whether or not the glue that holds this country together, that is based on assumptions of 10th Amendment sovereignty states, whether or not that's going to be held together, and because that has incredible implications. Go ahead. Thanks.
Well, I'll jump in before we go back around just to add to what you guys are all saying. It's such an important conversation to be having right now. I think this is why we were hearing mostly from Stephen Miller, but clearly from the rest of the cabinet, judicial coup. And I think what we come to see, and just going off of everything everyone's saying here, I think the reality is there are ways this should be done. Going back to what Bruce says with Congress, absolutely. The problem is that these things have been selectively and slowly from both sides of the paradigm chipped and broken down for this very kind of justification, to be able to say it doesn't work. That's why we need something outside of the structure that holds us in this checks and balance system. So I think screaming judicial coup, even if I think you can easily prove that from the left, if you see it divided, that there are similar things like that. But because the right and the power structure currently in there very much had that mindset based off what Bukele was doing in El Salvador, very clearly, claiming the same thing, a deep state fight, judicial coup from the other side, use that to remove the judges, to suspend civil liberties. And they're pointing at that like what we should be doing here right now. And so it's a terrifying overlap. And so my point is, by screaming that, you effectively manipulate people that can't see past the politics and thinking that they can't be the ones doing that because they're fighting that. Right. And so then you justify the very thing that we're all trying to fight right now. And I think that's why they say, the point of being stuck is designed to drive people to rationalize what would otherwise be, the complete contradiction of everything we believe in. And I'll point to two things we often bring up in this, which is just one main, there's more examples, but we often point to Murber versus Madison 1803, right? The idea is that if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. And one of the most important parts of that in my mind, and this is why I'm always arguing today, that we can see the political trap this all is. And we should be hoping and trying to coerce these people in politics to do what they should be doing. But I think this is where individual action comes into play, as in people, or Bruce talks about education, but just and I don't ever mean violence, but action outside of all of this. Show them that we will not comply with what's happening in any context if this is not, the erring aggressively on the side of the principle. The constitutional rights are inherent, shall not be infringed. There is no conversation in which those things can be challenged, in my mind. And if there's laws which are there that are repugnant, they're null and void. We need to go back to first principles here. Hardcore. That's my opinion.
I think it's a common theme we talk about is the abuse and degradation and debasement of language and words.
Yeah.
So let's go through several examples of that. This in Chicago, the agents that got boxed in, the woman was described as having some sort of semi-automatic rifle or something like that, arm that was pointed at the agents. But now when you see what she was arrested for, there's no mention at all of her having any arms. So was that a lie? So far, it seems that might have been a lie among many other lies that have been told by this administration. Okay, let's go through another big lie relating to the shutdown, and Bruce, knows this much better than me. Okay, there was an ACA law passed, the Affordable Care Act, it's called the Obamacare. Okay, some arguments right now were in the one big beautiful bill or ugly bill, or however anyone wants to characterize it. There were cuts for Medicaid and ending some of the Obamacare subsidies and things like that. And apparently, in part of this negotiations, is the Democrats want that given back to the people. They want people's health care approved. People can agree or disagree on the policy, but let's make one knowledge, and Bruce can confirm this. Okay, undocumented people are not eligible for those benefits.
No.
Okay, so when the Republicans say the Democrats want to give health care, this is all about giving health care to undocumented illegal immigrants. Okay, that's a lie, and they know it's a lie. And if they don't know it's a lie, they're obviously voting for legislation they don't know anything about, and they don't know the law, and they should not be taken seriously. But the reality is, when J.D. Vance says it and all the other people say it, they know that's the case. They know that people are ineligible for that. Now, might there be some small percentage of fraud, out there where some might think that's true of anything, okay? There's always, every government program is subject to some level of fraud.
Military contract.
Yeah, defense contract.
If now the standard is, if there's one individual who gets a benefit who shouldn't have, that we should kill that program, I'm happy to have that rule for everything the government spends money on, okay? Yeah. So if the Republicans want to adopt this principle, that if anyone who is not eligible for a program gets even $1, if one person gets $1 that they're not entitled to, that we kill that program completely, okay? I'm for that. Okay. But let's apply that principle to everything. Okay.
But Jeffrey, it's more obtuse than that. They pay in, but they don't get any benefits, so that they add to the solvency for the citizens, because the illegal aliens cannot and do not receive benefits, but they're still required to pay taxes on the FICA forms, right? So it's even more obtuse to blame the unauthorized immigrants for the problem. If anything, they're mitigating the problem.
Yes.
By
Now
paying in and not claiming anything.
Now let's go back to another abuse of language. Trump is now saying, okay, like he called Portland war ravaged, okay, DC is war ravaged, Chicago is war ravaged, okay, they're all war ravaged states, okay. So there's a war going on in these states, and they want to come in and they want to stop the war, is what their claim is supposed to be. Now these people who are protesting, what is now Trump calling them? Insurrectionists, okay? And going back to what Ryan said, the judge who said you can't send the troops, the National Guard into Oregon, don't play these games with me. You can't take them from California. You can't take them from Oregon. You can't take them from anywhere. You can't. Your description of the circumstance is bullshit. Okay, that's what the judge said, right? Okay. Complete bullshit. Okay. So don't bullshit us, and don't look for when I give you a ruling that says you can't use this. That doesn't mean I was only saying the only National Guard that could come from not that state, but you go to Texas and go to California, pull them out anywhere you want and send them over here. Okay. This is how bad faith this administration is. Okay. These actions are bad faith actions. Okay. They know what they're doing. This is just a matter of appealing to the base. And then what did he put out? This is what what I said last week that I think nobody really strongly disagreed with, is I think the president is setting us up to declare the Insurrection Act. Okay, he's going to sit back and say, I got to do something. I'm doing it. I'm trying to do it the legal way first, right? And because then I get stopped the legal way, but I'm going to keep using these terms, insurrectionists. It's not an accident that they're using these words. When Steve Miller calls the judge a legal insurrectionist, okay, committing legal insurrection. Okay, there's an intention to the use of these words. Okay, when Trump says, "I want these people who are now protesters," they're not protesters; they're insurrectionists. Well, maybe part of the thing he wants to do is federalize the crime, so he can send Kash Patel in to start investigating these people by now calling them not having committed a riot in a local jurisdiction, but they're actually committing insurrection, so that the federal government can claim jurisdiction over these things. So this is a game of power, where he wants all the power to use at his sole discretion. Okay.
You've downplayed this, Jeffrey. He's not only said that they're insurrectionists, he said they are engaged in the level of warfare against the United States. And if I identify you or your group as engaged in warfare by an executive order, there's no judicial review, and I can send the military out to mow you down and kill you, and there's no accountability. That's what he said. He's taken the Godfather to a new level. Now, it's true he starts out with drug traffickers, near Venezuela, but there is no limiting principle in his argument, which is I can say anybody who's engaged in crime is engaged in warfare. And that would have made all of the years of prohibition would have been cities engaged in warfare against the United States by illicit use of liquor. That's what is so frightening. There is no limiting principle. It's just a matter of time. He can select anybody on this program. He can select anybody watching this program. He can select anybody anywhere and says, you're engaged in warfare against the United States because I said you are, and I'm sending the military to snuff you out. That is how far our legal system is broken.
I want to be clear for everybody out there listening, we all, I'm sure, recognize this, but those that might not have picked up on this, this is an attack on the American people, not one side of the paradigm, as always how this tends to go. It's a building block scenario, but we've continually seen this attack on constitutional rights. We saw this from the left. We see it from the right. This is an attack on the foundational ideas. I have a clip, if we want to play it, of Trump talking about using force against protesters in LA should they decide to show up. In no way saying they're violating the law, in no way saying that they did something wrong. And this is before where we're at now. It was during the military parade. He said, if they show up, they'll be met with great force. And so it's just a very clear undermining of these core principles that, I mean, let's not forget what was happening to the right during the Biden's administration. You wore a red hat, you were a terrorist. You wore a red hat, you were an anti-Semite. These same groups are now pointing at the other side doing the same thing, right? This is an attack on American foundational rights. I just think that's very paramount to understand. You can play it if you want.
And I want everyone in the audience, you read, the 27 grievances against King George III. Those assertions of power are less than what President Trump is asserting his power over us, everybody on this program. Go read them. And those 27 grievances provoke the American Declaration of Independence, right? This, again, underscores what I say is a counter-revolution against July 4th, 1776. We're supposed to be celebrating its 250th anniversary. It's the epitaph of the Declaration of Independence. It's not a celebration day.
I'm, as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm thinking about where we are at the moment. The government is shut down. Having served 16 years in Congress, aside from voting, if you're in government, you're supposed to govern. The dynamic that's set up right now with the parties at loggerheads for real or imagined reasons, we have to look at a percolating constitutional crisis. We're there. We're there with respect to the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment, fill in the blanks. We're in a constitutional crisis. And the government, as a result of this, all these forces collide, and the government is at a stalemate. Now, the one thing that can happen, though, during that is a government, absent congressional restraint imposed under Article 1, Section 8, that a government can go to war. And we're seeing wars internally and externally being executed here. This war consciousness was underscored with the iteration of from Department of Defense to Department of War, with the underscoring by the Secretary of Defense putting on himself the mantle of Secretary of War, with reciting to the assembled leaders of the Pentagon that there is a war within, with sending the troops to various American cities, described as, has been stated here, as war-ravaged, bringing war to them. And then when people protest, as has been, illustrated here brilliantly, they suddenly transform from protesters who under the First Amendment have a right to speak out to terrorists, insurrectionists. We're in a constitutional crisis, and and underscoring it all, going back to what Jeffrey said, are lies. Orwell warned about this, and we're seeing the fulfillment of his words as a prophecy.
Yeah, I would just add to what you said, that it's not that the government doesn't operate with the shutdown. It gives the president even more power to act unilaterally. He's not refraining from executive orders. He's not refraining from deciding what money he wants to use, where he wants to use it, invading the appropriations, the power of the purse of Congress. He's acting on his own, independently of what Congress is doing. So this simply compounds the problem of limitless executive authority. And without any conceivable oversight whatsoever. And when you mentioned the violations, Dennis, truly, all those amendments have been flouted. But he's usurped powers, the integral powers of Congress that make it more than wallpaper. the power of the purse and the power of the sword, the declare war clause and the appropriations power. He's usurped it, and Congress has laid back, supine, cowardly, and let it happen. I mean, I can guarantee you the framers never thought a branch of government would decide to surrender, throw up a white flag without any push. That was inconceivable to them. But that's what we're seeing in Congress today.
Well, I want to go back to a couple of things. One is Madison's statement. The fact is, that, again, something we reiterated over and over again, is that when one party controls all branches of government, that's a state of tyranny.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this example was immaterial. And what's further reinforcement of that? Okay. What are we hearing or what are we reading on the reason why the Republicans in Congress will not negotiate with the Democrats? The Republicans, what we're reading is, might be true, might not be true, is that the Republicans say they don't really know what Trump wants. So they don't want to engage in a negotiation that ends up a failed negotiation because they end up negotiating something that's contrary to what Trump wants. Okay. Now, the Congress is not supposed. Then the Congress is not. Then those Republicans who are advocating that position are basically saying they're a junior branch of government, that they're not a co-equal branch of government, because what Trump wants should be completely irrelevant to them. They don't represent Trump. They're supposed to represent the country and the people and the Constitution. So whatever Trump wants or doesn't want, okay, should be irrelevant, because whatever he wants or doesn't want, they have the ability to override that. So, I think I saw one. It was a horrible thing, but I saw a Democratic commercial where they were out looking for Republicans, and the Republicans are nowhere to be found. So, I mean, I thought it was really pretty amateurish. But the point is, they apparently they went away because they don't want to talk, because they don't know where Trump stands, which means Trump is happy with having this power and happy, at least at this point in time. He must think that the politics are good for him and he's getting what he wants, and is going to keep doing and keep saying that this is all about the Democrats. The only goal the Democrats want to have is buy votes for 2026 by giving illegals, all these health care benefits, which we know all this is just a lie, and they know it's a lie. So what they're saying, they know it's a lie.
Here's the paradox, Jeffrey. Trump. And the reason why the Congress is holding firm, pretty much for him, at least the Republicans, is because the Republican base, which is basically Trump's base, that base is holding firm for Trump. Yes. Until the economy starts going this way, then that can change. However, the larger polity here, all Americans' support for Trump is declining. So what we have here is a formula for intractability, where Trump can hold the Republicans in line. They happen to be in a majority right now. But the rest of the country is starting to ask questions like, what the heck's going on? I think where this leads is this, notwithstanding the credibility or lack thereof of the Democratic Party. But, things keep breaking down. The Democrats will sweep in 2026. There's no scenario that you can keep doing what he's doing, see his ratings fall across the board nationally, and see the Republicans hold control of the House, and who knows of what will happen in the Senate. So, there's going to be consequences. We're locked. We appear to be locked in right now. We heard about locked-in syndrome, but let me tell you, there's so dynamic going on, and there's a limit to what Americans will tolerate. Mm-hmm. And look, I'm speaking to you from Cleveland, Ohio, and this is primarily a Democratic city, but there are Republican areas outlying, and I'm hearing from Republicans, they're very concerned about the direction that's going right now. These are people who may or may not have voted for Trump. I'm hearing people who voted for Trump express skepticism about the direction he's going right now. Right. As much as we can focus on now, which is what this discussion is always about, Oh, I see. You go another year later, could be dramatically different. It'll depend on the economy, but these other things will feed into it and help build up the dissent.
Yeah, I want to throw
one quick point.
Ryan, let me apologize, but I want to make this point because I think we don't want to overstate this as just a Trump problem. As Dennis knows and everybody knows, no president has ever surrendered power back voluntarily that he inherited from his predecessor. It does not happen. Okay, it doesn't. And that if we go back to Watergate, which I was involved in every single day, it's true the Republicans who stuck with Nixon were slaughtered in the 1974 elections, right? But because there wasn't an education and a deep understanding of the underlying flawed ideas of the Constitution, we're back to an imperial presidency, way worse than it was under Nixon, way worse. I mean, this is when Nixon told Frost, when the president does it, that means it's not illegal. Everybody said, that's absurd. That's not true. Now, when President Trump says the same thing, shrugs your shoulders. And the reason why I underscore this is that we cannot take our eye off the larger ball. We have been living in an empire bubble with increasing concentration on the executive, whether it's Harry Truman saying that we got whatever it is, a police action in Korea or LBJ, there was a second torpedo attack, Gulf of Tonkin resolution, Republicans the same way, since at least 75 years. And if we do not change this conception, I say we're now the public and even members of Congress, their whole lives have seen nothing but limitless executive power. Congress is just an afterthought, even in their own minds, that we're going to keep going down the same road of limitless executive power, which we have to stop. Otherwise, I don't care who occupies the White House. You give anybody limitless power, they will turn malevolent. Read Suetonius's 12 Caesars. All the 12 Caesars, when their little kids said they're so endearing, they're so angelic, they're so avuncular, they're just wonderful people, right? Then you had Caligula and Nero and Claudius. Give them limitless power, they turned into devils, right? That's the nature of the species. And so it's true that we have to focus right now on the current occupant, but we need to understand education. You got to defend the process irrespective of the personality. If we don't do that, we're going to be back in the same situation another 4 or 8 years from now, even if Trump is out of office.
Well, I want to comment on. I agree with everything you said, Bruce, and but I also want to refer back to the midterms that Dennis referred to. We don't know yet the circumstances of this the judge's house that was on fire, got burned down actually in South Carolina. We don't know if it's an arson or just an accident. We don't know yet. But what facts do we know? Okay, we do know that the Department of Justice has asked for information, voting information, and the information they've requested, including names, addresses, driver's license numbers, social security numbers, for a whole bunch of registered voters for one of Trump's executive orders, making sure that non-citizens are not registering to vote. So I think that given the fact that now there is no independent branch of government. Okay, every agency is captured under this theory of the unitary executive, so they're all working on behalf of Trump's interests. So we have the whole executive branch not representing the Constitution, not representing rule of law, but representing the interests of Trump. And frequently they're quite overt about it. Well, we're here to execute Trump's policies. We're here to reinforce things. We're making sure that nobody's here that will stop Trump doing from what Trump wants to do. So, I mean, they're all quite overt about the fact is that they're going to do whatever Trump is going to tell them to do, and they're going to do their best interest of doing it. And if they have to act in bad faith and tell some lies and things like that, they're going to do whatever he expects them to do to advance his interests. Okay. So why do they want all this information? What is the compelling need for all this information? Well, this judge ruled against the government, the federal Department of Justice having access to that information. This judge Diane Goodstein, also had death threats, docs, and things like that, including comments, including that she was attacked by the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmit Dillon, also was one of the people who criticized her and attacked her. Of course, they're now saying their words had no impact on any of this if it was an act of arson, because of their words never incite. It's just the other people's words incite. Their words never incite. So we already have a benchmark of what Trump was prepared to do to not certify an election in 2020. So what do you think we're going to see in 2026 in contesting certification if it's announced that the Democrats won? What do you think the Republicans are going to do, what Trump will expect to be done, to make sure he does not face a hostile, Democratic House or Senate or both, even though it's kind of unlikely at this point in time, but anything's possible. So what do you think Trump is going to use in all the instruments of government he has at his disposal to challenge that outcome? And what will he expect the Republicans to do with respect to the certification? Because we already know what he told Pence, right? I mean, you're going to be loyal to me, or the Constitution. Okay. So
let's if I may, from my own experience inside the Congress as a Democrat, it wasn't unusual for Democratic leaders to insist that we support a Democratic president, and Republicans do the same thing. So so political parties, and this is one of the challenges in our system, where political parties can play a role in vitiating the system of checks and balances by insisting that congressional majorities support the president of their party, notwithstanding whatever he's doing. That's one thing. Now, I will say again, Jeffrey, that if the U.S. economy goes south, and of course we know that both political parties are jockeying to try to change the congressional delegations within, through redistricting. But if the economy goes south, I don't care what they think they're going to do in 2026, because the American people, if they feel this thing isn't working for them, and the chances are we could end up there because they're, speaking from Cleveland again, a lot of people having trouble making ends meet, rent, cost of food, on and on. The one thing that's happening right now is the cost of fuel is relatively low. If something changes in terms of a war that causes that to go up, all bets are off. So even though, Jeffrey, I accept the admonition which you offer and the concern, I still have a reserve of confidence that the American people are not going to be taken for a ride based on their pocketbooks. We may see a lot of assent for various policies we disagree with, but I will tell you, when it gets down to what's happening at the kitchen table or the family budget, if it's not working in 2026, the Republican Congress can say au revoir or goodbye, and the Senate could be up for grabs.
Yeah,
I think there's
Dennis. My point is this. I think right now it seems that the amount of people who identify themselves as Republicans and more and more people identifying themselves as independent, and as opposed to, that seems to be the party that's growing the most, is the independent party, and Democrats and Republicans are getting the smaller percentage of the total amount of people who identify themselves. But of people who identify themselves as Republican, the type of support Trump has amongst those people who identify themselves as Republicans, MAGA, is very strong. Okay, stronger than most Republican presidents have enjoyed. Okay, and these people are inclined to give him time. Okay, these are people who are not going to say, if Trump says I need another year, I had all these Democrats, I had all these obstacles, I had all these insurrectionist judges and things like that. You got to give me more time. That base will give him time. Okay, Now he probably lose a lot of the independents, and of course he's not going to get the Democrats, and some people who said, I don't like Kamala, but and I voted for Trump then because I didn't like Kamala, but I'm not really a MAGA person. I just thought he was the better of the two candidates. So yeah, but the point of it is, it might be a close enough election, okay? And then the question is what will Trump do? Will he concede? When has Trump conceded a loss? Okay, never. Okay, so given the fact that he's not likely to concede a loss, given the fact that I don't think anyone in the executive branch now wants to be subpoenaed by any legislature to have to then make themselves accountable for all the illegal things they've been doing this period of time and be subject to investigations that they'd likely be subject to in case they lose. So you got to assume that there's a high motivation to sit back and not see a change of control to either the Senate or the House. So now you have a president who already was on record saying, I'm going, it doesn't matter whether I win or lose. I mean, even at that point in time, what Bannon said, you might recall what Bannon's comments were, prior to 2020 election, he said, no matter what happens, if Trump loses, he's still going to declare himself winner in the election is a fraud. So no matter what, he's going to claim he won. So what do you think their incentives are, to what could be, if it's a landslide, which I don't think it will be, because the economy is really, really bad. Maybe that'll happen, but I don't think that's likely to happen. But if it's not a landslide and it's close, okay, Trump is going to use every instrument in his power, the executive branch, to not certify. Every trick that they can do to not certify a Democratic majority, they will use.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, under the Constitution, under the Constitution, Jeffrey, Congress decides electoral disputes, not the president. Congress votes on that, and Dennis knows. Maybe there are a couple during Dennis's tenure in the Congress. So the president can utilize whatever political power he has, but he doesn't have a vote in deciding who Congress certifies won the outcome of a contested election. But listen, Ryan has been very patient, and I cut him off, so I want to make space for Ryan. Yield to the floor to Ryan.
Well, thank you. I mean, the point I was making before, we're way past at this point, but what's on my mind now is I think there's many things to think of that I don't know what I think maybe Jeffrey might be somewhat amenable to this thought, but I'm not sure. I brought it up more than once, but I think it's worth considering at the very least whether or not our vote translates to the outcome in this current reality, right? I mean, my opinion is, of course, if forced to live within a state of society as more of an anarchist mind, I understand, I believe, as we've made clear, that the Constitution is, in my opinion, the best piece of, a best thing that I've ever seen, that it can hold checks and balances on some government. My point is that I think, and within that a well-informed electorate and voting in that kind of a situation would be paramount. I think we all recognize that powerful people are aware of that, and powerful people are aware that that could put a hitch in their agendas. And I think over a very long period of time, if not even, even more recently than ever, we've seen those things slowly manipulate. Even we talk about gerrymandering and the different points that already are very clear. My point is, if we can consider that our vote's not translating to the outcome, what does that really mean? And I think we then recognize that we see a power, and that's, I think, regardless of that point, what I say next is relevant to everything anyway, but I think with considering that, it changes a lot. That we went back to 2020, we could talk about even the Newsweek article, where the Democrats basically wrote an article saying that they worked with some shadowy backroom entity to just basically stop Trump from winning. And then the next election, what they both say? Well, before we even got to the end point of the process, both of them were saying that they were already willing to criticize the outcome of either side, and they both did, right? I mean, well, they were ready for, and now we have the Democrats basically claiming there's manipulation. The same thing happens every time. So jumping forward quickly to Jeffrey's point of where we're going next, I think that it's inevitable. I think we're going to see both sides claim, that there is cheating leading up to it every way they can. Whoever ultimately wins, whatever we think that means. Again, my opinion is that this is a power structure that doesn't really care which side, it's a false duopoly. I think that's the reality. But watching that kind of back and forth, I think we can recognize that it is being manipulated, it's being controlled. And we can see the sort of teeter-totter, which was kind of the point I was going to make before, of power, where you can see them rationalizing either side. Now, if the voting still does play a process, and I hope that it does, what we can see is that you go back to, let's just even say Bush, and you can recognize that it was just, the war on terror. And it was very clearly an American sentiment that this was a problem. We were tired with war. And so well, let's try something else. And I guess we only have one other option. And so you can see this kind of back and forth. You can go from back to Biden and Trump, and you can see the same point. We had COVID-19, and everyone thought that was insane, and it was. And so we tried with Trump. Now we're going to see Trump, and we're going to see the same thing we're already watching. A wild over, a constitutional crisis. People are going to then say, I argue, independents and Democrats and a huge portion of even MAGA Republicans are going to say, let's try something different. And maybe we get the independent, maybe we get the Elon Musk third party. But my point is that it's always built to teeter-totter back and forth. As James Corbett points out, these are stepping stones, right? One party does one thing, the next one takes up the banner, and it continues the same thing. The wedge issues may change, but ultimately it builds that power. I'm arguing, I think that's designed, and whether or not Congress members are aware that the real power structure is very aware of that. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, but I think what you're pointing out, Ryan, is that this is a deficiency in the thinking power reflection of the American people. It's easy to find out because human beings are imperfect. Okay, any system is going to have some flaws, but as I've repeated over and over again, if you can't find a cure that's less bad than the disease, acknowledge you got a disease, but don't do anything until you got a cure that's better.
Right.
And so what we're finding is people jump up and say, oh, it's not a perfect system. True enough. Jeffrey pointing out, no system is going to be completely fraud-free. But you can't find anything that's superior to what it is. Leave it alone, because it's going to get even worse under your system, because you think it's personalities. You think it's the second coming of Jesus or something that's going to save us. No, it's, as Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it, that's we the people. We have to keep it. And if we can't find of something superior, say, okay, it's imperfect, it's got flaws, but to go down that road is worse than what we have. The fact is that King Louis XVI was less bad, had less power than Napoleon when he did self-coronation. The French couldn't see that. They knew King Louis was bad. They ended up with something worse.
A good example, just to make your point into like a specific policy, look at COVID-19. Look at the way that happened under Biden, right? And the same argument, what we were all saying, well, the solution for this is going to be worse. And yes, inevitably, then Trump steps in, right? What does he say in his press conference? The solution will be worse than the problem. Like, he said that because he heard that in the conversation. And what inevitably happened? Every single thing they laid out, including the shots and everything else, ended up being a problem. And so it's not a left-right problem. That's really what I'm trying to get at in my kind of quick overview of a very large idea, is that this is a continual back and forth idea. And I don't think that people within the power structures truly know that. Not all of them, but either way, you can't miss the linear progression of the real agendas building into some technocratic panopticon that we're living through right now. And I think we get pulled in, but rightly so. These are very important things, not necessarily all we're talking about, but like the day-to-day wedge issues, there's importance to those, but we get sucked into those alone, and we miss the continual problem. That's my point of the teeter-totter, is that I'm not saying I even have the exact solution. I think that's what we always bump up against in this conversation, is that we can clearly see the problem, but that's step one. But that we need to at least acknowledge that not voting one side or the other back and forth forever is not solving the problem. The lesser of evils gets you more evil.
Yeah, let me ask Dennis, is it easier to campaign, you're the expert here, on being negative and just pointing out deficiencies than saying, but I got a cure worse, that's better than the disease? I mean, like Nixon, I've got a secret plan to end the Vietnam War, which was so secret he didn't even know what it was. But it's easy to criticize, what we were doing, but he didn't come up with any positive plan. Is it part of the political campaign issue that you as a candidate find it much easier to attract votes by just pointing out these are the negative things in the status quo without having to address, is there any way that you can actually improve on the status quo?
You put your finger on how American politics has devolved within the parties and in the candidates of those parties. I've served 16 years in the House. Throughout most of those 16 years, I had primaries and general elections, or separate elections. I didn't get elected to Congress until my fifth try over a period of 25 years. If at first you don't succeed, try again. What I found is this, that while there are elections that run along slogans and are drenched in negativity. The elections that I was able to win, which were quite a few, I worked to articulate a solid program and give people something to vote for. Now, that didn't mean that I did not simultaneously challenge the policies of the person who was on the other side of the aisle, because that's necessary to do. You have to tell people if you want them to vote for you, you got to do two things. One is you first have to say what you stand for. And I tried to keep it pretty much on economics and made opposition to war an economic issue as well. But the other part is you have to demonstrate where the disagreements are with the incumbent or the challenger. And where I've always departed, though, from the conventional politics is you don't deny the other person his or her humanity. You don't strip them of their character, of whatever's good about them. You keep it based on what you believe in and say you'll do, based on what they have said or have done. And the politics today is a Punch and Judy show. It's just, it's become more of a blood sport than ever, and it's degrading, and it tears people to pieces, and that continues the polarization, so that after the election, you can't come together. You're still fighting, and that's where we are right now, because. And that goes back to, some of the things that Jeffrey raised.
Well, I was going to say too, that's what I was saying before, is like, that's kind of one of the designs in that, is that the election never stops, right? We've seen this, like not the election from before, but the next one already begins. Well, first of all, I think the first 2 years are consumed with arguments about cheating and stealing, and that goes and then the beginning of the third year is all election forward. I mean, really, I think it's day one election forward for the next season, but I think that's consuming, right? I mean, we've seen that, whether that's by design or not. Look at the last two, administration. The entire time frame has been completely clouded with back and forth arguments of stealing. I kind of think that's by design.
Well, to add to what you said, Ryan, let's put on top of that a 24-hour news cycle. On top of that, right. Proliferation of social media that's ideologically driven, and you have not just an echo chamber, but a cacophony, which makes any kind of rational decisions in the interest of the country increasingly difficult. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line will be economics. Even though, as Jeffrey said, people may give the president time, the question isn't whether the president is going to have time, it's whether the American people in their homes, in their businesses, whether they're going to have time, whether they can survive. And I think that enlightened self-interest at one point always has the capacity to save the day in the hope for consent of the government and government of the people.
Yeah, you remember Ronald Reagan's famous line in campaigning against Jimmy Carter: "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" Right? One line, it was a clincher, right? And he destroyed him. It was very simple, and everybody could understand that. 20% interest rates, and everybody knows the inflation. And standing in, I remember, Dennis, you probably too, car lines for gasoline. They were like 3 miles long. And he said, no, if you got 3 mile long car lines for a gasoline, you're not going to win the election.
Imagine, Bruce, the Democrats using Ronald Reagan in 2026, 2028 commercials.
Yeah. Right.
I also think that would be very successful, because I think of where people's minds are at. Like this speaks to something that I think we were touching on a bit there, is that we talk about the main political conversation, right? And I agree with the general sentiment. Like, Trump has unprecedented support in that base, but what does that represent in the full picture? I mean, we could talk about the election every time and something 40-something% participate within that. The majority is people that register as independent, so there's this huge group of people that don't even participate, right? I think what that speaks to is not just apathy. I think people are aware of all the things that we're frustrated by, but we care enough to keep trying to take part in it and change. But they're just so, they don't have a voice. They don't have any influence. They're just tired. They don't want to play this game anymore. So I think doing that speaks to something that's like, look, we're beyond two-party politics. And I think we want that, but at the same time, I'm worried that will be the next kind of manipulation. That's what I meant about like Elon's third party, which is not really a third party. I sense that thing coming because the power structure clearly recognizes that we're not, in my opinion, that we're not buying into the two-party game anymore. I don't think the left-right categories they point to represent most Americans anymore. Not in earnest.
One of the things it just amplify, we have to awaken the sense of citizen responsibility. Yes. Just opting out, that's not going to help anything, right?
I agree.
That's what the leaders want to have happen. And as much as it looks like it's a long-term progress forward, it's not going to happen the next day. You got to stay in there, utter your voice. It may not be the clincher the first time or the second. Dennis ran 5 times. You come back and say, we're not sitting out. And that's why I vote always in the presidential elections for James Madison or George Washington. I want to send a signal. It's a write-in. I know it's going to lose. I want you to know I'm engaged, but I don't like any of you, so I'm going to vote for these people. That's why I believe it's important to vote, even if you write in candidates, to show that you are politically engaged. But
I will if there was abstention.
You have to start that. People forget 1776 did not leap out of Zeus's brain like Athena on July 4th. It started 13, 14, 15 years earlier. The Stamp Tax Congress, the opposition, the pleas to the king. These are abuses. So you got to be patient in politics. I mean, Dennis knows that better than anybody. It doesn't turn on a dime, but it pays off if you're persistent. And that has to be part of our citizen ethos.
If we can snuff out corruption.
I have a different forecast than you, Bruce. I mean, I'm not going to bet with the fact that the people are going to save liberty. Okay. So I think we're going to continue to have this two-party system. I think how it'll be is very simple. The point you've made is once you've granted the executive power, they're going to keep it and build on it. Okay. So right now we have an executive that might be the most powerful executive ever in quote times of peace, even though he claims everything is a state of emergency. And whoever is elected in 2028, whoever ends up occupying the White House, whether they're elected or not, is going to build on that power. Okay. And which means the ability to check that power will get more and more difficult with time. Okay. The more power that's accumulated, the harder it is to check. Okay. So what you'll have is if the occupant of the White House also has the majority in the Supreme Court and the legislature, we know the legislature doesn't want to do anything, okay, other than do the bidding of the chief executive if it's the same party, okay? And so they will try and rubber stamp almost everything that president wants to do. And the president won't ask them to do much because the president will just govern through executive orders, okay? We've already said the president, don't even worry about the legislative branch, just issue executive orders, okay? So given the fact that executive orders have worked so well for Trump, okay, and other presidents will say, gee, why am I going to go through a legislature? I'm just going to govern through executive orders, okay? What will stop that is eventually, maybe sometime, then one of the other parties will get in control over one of the branches or both branches, and what will they do? They will be permanently investigating the party that occupies the White House, okay? That's all we're going to see. We're going to see if the Democrats control the legislature and Republicans in the White House, they're going to call that president illegitimate, and they're going to investigate them, the entire administration. And if it's the reverse, they're going to do exactly the same thing. All we're going to have is Russiagate, Hunter Biden. I mean, you always find every little scandal to delegitimize the person occupying the White House, because there is no conversation anymore about policy. When have we had an intelligent conversation about any policies? Okay, we sit back and say immigration reform. Okay, let's reform the immigration system. Tell me who's proposed any idea other than mass deportations, okay, through executive orders. Okay, where is an idea to sit back and reform. I mean, Bush tried and failed, but pretty much since then there's been no discussion. Okay, tariff policy. Okay, it seems to me whatever number Trump comes up with, nobody questions it. Okay, nobody sits back and says, there's no even economist sitting back and saying, where did you come up with that number? Explain to me what's the rationale behind it. Why won't they have that conversation? Because everyone knows there is no rationale behind that number. Okay, it's his instinct. Okay, and nobody wants to challenge that instinct and have a conversation that's a serious conversation. Okay, with the politics right now, there's no serious conversation about anything, any topic whatsoever. There is no serious conversation about it. And the people don't seem to be upset at the absence of a serious conversation on any topic. The American people are not saying, gee, you know what? I want deportations, but I want to sit back. How many people will we take as refugees a year? What's our criteria for taking people in? What's our immigration policy? How should we have it? Isn't it kind of a disgrace that people have to go through and be vetted for 5 or 7 years? Can't we do better than that? I mean, who's having that conversation? Nobody. And they're not having it because the people don't care. Okay, people don't care as long as they feel don't raise my taxes. Keep issuing is all the debt you have in the world, and basically if my home becomes unaffordable, figure out how you make it more affordable for me. Okay. So, and then, well, let's control the Fed so we can lower interest rates, or we could try and lower interest rates. I mean, so, there's no interest in really having Congress do anything. Okay.
Yeah, Jeffrey,
people don't want Congress to do anything. Okay.
Jeffrey, what you just said, should concern us all, because you've described a country that's in crisis throughout this discussion, which I have to unfortunately leave in a moment. We've talked about a constitutional crisis, a crisis in governance, a crisis in public confidence, a crisis in public involvement. Part of the responsibility of a political party, which the Democrats seem to have forgotten, they're out of power right now, is that you have to give people something to vote for. And there are so many serious economic challenges that are facing so many Americans right now, with the cost of credit, the cost of housing, the cost of education, if they can make it for their children, the ability to have a health care that you can afford, the ability to have a safe and secure retirement. I'm just naming a few of them. The reason why the Democrats swept the power after the Depression was that Franklin Roosevelt and his administration brought forth a New Deal and didn't just talk about it, they enacted it. We have not seen, with the possible exception of some things during Johnson's Great Society, any kind of sweeping reforms brought forward in generations now. And this is happening at a time when the wealth is concentrating at the top and accelerating further upwards, and government is being used to help facilitate that. So again, if the Democratic Party comes forward with, if it's even possible at this point, with a program of honest, comprehensive economic reform that's like a New Deal, there is a possibility that people would care and would vote because they would believe it makes a difference. So with that, I just want to thank each and every one of you for giving me an opportunity to participate in these very important discussions. So thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, and I would just add to what Dennis said and amplify Jeffrey on what you said. Jeffrey's observation is accurate, but leaders have a special responsibility in self-governing, right? To whom much is given, much is expected.
Right.
And the people can't be expected to be masters of the Constitution. Members of Congress can't, because they have an oath to uphold and defend it. And so I believe that it's the leadership in some sense that compounds what we might call citizen apathy or docility.
I agree.
Their lives are there. They're the ones who are responsible for coming up, with ideas, and we think X, Y, or Z is an improvement on the situation. And in some degree, that's been forfeited because all the members of Congress have basically said, you know what, let the president decide it. We're not going to get involved anymore. President will decide it. We veto. It's kind of turned the legislative process on its head. The president proposes, and sometimes Congress says yes or no, but the Congress doesn't initiate anything anymore. And with specifics with regard to immigration, that's where the Constitution is clearest, that Congress has the plenary power to enact laws relating to naturalization and immigration. It wasn't the executive branch. And when the first time in 100 years we enacted, and not that I applauded it, an immigration law, the Chinese Exclusion Act, for whatever else it was the brainchild of Congress, even if it was, I think, deformed. It wasn't the executive branch issuing an executive order saying the Chinese can't do this or that. And that's where it's so alarming to me, because institutionally, we can give greater trust to the congressional process than the executive. Because one, it requires some deliberation because you got to get a consensus. Number two, it's vastly more transparent than the White House is. It's open in the public. Members are vastly more accessible than the White House. And there isn't any ability for the one person in the Congress to say, everybody shut up, this stay on the team, you can't go off the reservation. Whereas the reason why the executive branch gets involved in so many missteps is because there's no feedback they permit. Hey, you're with us or against us. If you say anything I don't like, you get fired. And so there's no deliberation. That just means institutionally, you're likely to get, even if it's flawed, a better outcome if you submit something to the legislative process than to the executive branch. We get wild swings and secrecy and little or zero deliberation.
I still advocate. I think, Dennis, you got to.
I'm sorry that I have to leave right now, but thank you, Jeffrey, and Ryan and Bruce for allowing me to participate in this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. See you next week.
Yeah. See you next week. I'll make one comment on this, and then we'll change to something else because, Bruce, you have a hard stop also shortly. I keep advocating this position, but I do think the people, if they want to exercise their power, have a lot of power, and they need to exercise it. And how do I think people should do it? Is by nullification. Okay, I think if you think that Pam Bondi or her predecessor, Garland, are liars and presenting false. And basically partisan and using the law to persecute people, not to prosecute it, where under the principle of equal justice under law. Very simple. When they go to grand jury just say, this smells like garbage, I'm not gonna indict, or juries can sit back and say, well, I heard the case, but this isn't unfair, also persecution of somebody. It seems to me, well, you have 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans who each have second, third homes where they declared it as a primary residence, but somehow only the Democrats are going to be charged now. And then maybe when the Democrats are in power, they'll only charge the Republicans, for this stuff. Very simple. The jurors can nullify that. The jurors can sit back and say, I'm finding the person innocent. Okay. So, I think this is the grand jury made a mistake. I heard the facts. It's a persecution by law. Okay. And we don't want people to use the law to persecute. We want the law to be prosecuted in an equal, just way. And if we think it isn't, we're just going to find the people, innocent, until the government starts applying the law, equally to everyone. So we have the power to do that, okay? I don't know why more people, besides myself, are not advocating that people should just go out and use the power of nullification. Just say no. The government comes up and say no. I'm on a jury, say no. I'm on a grand jury, say no. We should just start saying no. When the government oversteps its bounds, we just need to say no. Nothing is stopping us from saying no.
In my experience, most people don't know about that. There's an active effort to make sure Americans don't know about that, as well as abstention. Go ahead, Bruce. I'll make a point.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, but that is the system, Jeffrey, and I think you may have understated a little bit its effectiveness. That is, the U.S. Supreme Court has said, jury comes in with a verdict of not guilty. That's it. Can't appeal it. Done. You can't question them why. They can come up with a not guilty verdict. There's no way to police whether they paid any attention to jury instructions. And at least with regard to some, we know that in this District of Columbia, the grand juries have refused to indict, somebody for throwing a sandwich at an ICE officer. And I remember that when in Trump's first term, when he sicked, John Durham on trying to conjure up, evidence that the Clinton and Clinton associates were spreading false information about Russian interference and the Steele dossier. It went to the jury. He got no convictions. The jury acquitted them, which is unusual. And they understood that this was a political case. Now, the system is not perfect by any means, but it's clear as far as the law goes, that juries and grand juries have unfettered right without probing, other than accepting bribes, as to the underlying reasons why they decided we don't want to go forward on this score. And I remember there was a period of time when the American people were very much back of Jose Marti's effort to overthrow Spain. This is before the Spanish-American War, and there were Neutrality Act prosecutions against Jose Marti and his colleagues for using the United States as a base, to go attack the Spanish colony in Cuba. And the juries refused to convict because they were sympathetic and they thought that was an abuse. But I do think, unfortunately, I think this knowledge is not widespread, and the judges are not told, hey, tell the jury they can acquit for any reason they want. Right. So it's underused because of ignorance, but the power still remains there. And certainly, as you pointing out, it can be a very powerful tool.
And I want to just reiterate that I completely think this is a very important point that we could spend an entire conversation about things like this. And I think people should be looking into this, like Jeffrey said, and educate themselves on that power. But if to go a little bit deeper, this is actually something that I can see has been actively fought to hide from us. Like there's a more than one story I found of somebody on a public sidewalk out front of a courthouse with a sign that simply says, learn about your right of jury nullification. And more than once, those people get arrested for no legal reason. There's been a good platform called the Three Thought Project has covered this a lot in the past, a lot of cop watching and stuff like that. And and you can look into it deeper and find, or even your point, how in the world in a situation where the judge takes special care to inform them about every individual right, but doesn't mention that? I think it's because they're very aware that takes the power out of their hands. And my point, the same is about like abstention, similar conversation. I think that's a huge thing that has been removed. Like to your point, I would be voting every time because I'm politically active. And I agree with your point that I think everybody should be. That doesn't mean vote, in my opinion, because I think that's been stolen from us. I argue, though, that in the sense of like with there's false binary, two false choices, if I were able to go and say, I'm here, I'm present, I'm voting, and I'm abstaining at a protest, that's something that's been stolen from us. It's the same kind of conversation, and I think we need to educate Americans about this.
Any dispute that then gets subject where it requires a grand jury to be impaneled and a jury trial, that's our opportunity.
Right.
That's our opportunity to nullify everything we think the government has done in bad faith. Whenever we think the government has been a bad faith actor, we have the power. At the end of the day, the power is reserved for us. That's why the trial by jury is so important. It's so important that we have that trial by jury, because at the end of the day, the people have the last word. Our peers have the last word, not the government, us. We, the people, have the last word. We need to start using that. Okay?
Yeah. And one thing, Jeffrey and Ryan, a very prominent grievance in the Declaration of Independence against King George III was depriving the American people of the right to jury trial. He carried them off to Great Britain and subject them to admiralty court or military courts. So that was a recognition 250 years ago that this was critical to securing and safeguarding liberty, the right to jury trial.
Liberty and justice.
And we're seeing some of that today with military courts, by the way. I mean, that's happened a lot, especially foreign policy, but I've seen a few cases that overlap with domestic policy as well. And I worry about that starting to be a thing for the same reason.
Yeah. I mean, and going down that road, I mean, we're really questioning now even the idea of civilian supremacy over the military with regard to Trump's claim that he can claim any situation as war. It doesn't matter whether it's kindergartners out with placards saying, we don't like Mr. Trump. He's saying, I have limitless power to describe anybody engaged as warfare. He starts out with drug traffickers, but he hasn't said.
The only reason why he can do this, is we ignored the warning of every founder. Okay.
Yeah.
No permanent standing army. Okay.
Right.
If he doesn't have a permanent standing army, he's got nobody to order around. Okay. Yeah. That was the check and balance. This system is going back to the design, the genius of the design. Okay. The genius of the design was they all said, if you give the president power, he'll find an excuse to use it. Okay. If you give him an army, he'll find an excuse to use the army. Okay. That's what they said. Okay. So they didn't want a permanent standing army. Okay. So that the president could abuse that power and send them off to kill people anywhere they wanted. They did not want that. Okay. They wanted militias, that where the commander-in-chief of each militia was the governor of that state. Okay. And the president had to appeal to the militias. Like right now, you got the Abbott saying, tell me where you want me to send National Guard and I'll send them. Okay. But then the other states say, you can't send them here. So you can't invade my state with your National Guard. So basically, for the way I look at it, is Trump is declaring war, okay, without an act of Congress against Illinois. He's taking National Guard from one state and deploying it in another state. So that's an invasion of the state. I mean, this is so absurd. So, really, he's declaring war and Congress is doing, absolutely nothing. But at least there's limited power if all he can use is 400 National Guard, okay? He's not going to be a threat to many people if he sends 400 National Guard or 1,000 National Guard.
Until the Insurrection Act.
What makes the executive power is we've given up, what are we giving? $1 trillion a year to the military? To the
$1.5 trillion.
More than that.
The $1 trillion to the Department of War, Department of War. Okay, we've decided to fund the Department of War over $1 trillion. Okay, after having a founder say George Washington. Okay, I think he was a military guy, right? He had a title, right? Like a general or something like that. So I don't think he was like a private or something. He was like a general, right? And he said no permanent standing armies.
Yeah, and one of the reasons
George Washington.
Yeah, one of the reasons, Jeffrey and Ryan, one of the reasons behind, if not the major reason behind the Second Amendment, was to establish militias. So we didn't need standing armies. Right. That when we were in fact invaded, we'd summon the militias who would then fight in self-defense, but they would be summoned only on occasions of invasion. And that is basically how it worked. The first conscription came in the Civil War, but that's like 70 or 80 years later. Otherwise, even we're involved in some of these skirmishes, like the War of 1812, we didn't have standing armies. We didn't have conscription at all. These were state militias there, fortified by the Second Amendment. And again, because we at the outset said we do not want to be the British Empire. We want to celebrate liberty as our glory, not the march of the foot soldier, the march of the mind, the thinker over the armored knight. And unfortunately, that has evaporated. This country's culture celebrates the armored knight over the thinker like 1,000,000 to 1. And you see it everywhere, whether it's the professional ball games, whether they get special priority on airplanes, whatever. And I certainly do not want at all to denigrate the bravery and courage of these people, but they're being celebrated, but they should be honored by fighting in self-defense, not running abroad in search of monsters to destroy. They don't even know what they're fighting for. And that was clearly the case. I talked to many who fought in Iraq. They said the first day they entered Baghdad, they said, why the heck are we here? We really think the Sunni-Shia conflict in Baghdad has anything to do with the security of the United States? Nothing. And that's why I don't want any of my remarks to suggest any lack of respect for these people, courage, but it should be for fighting in self-defense, defending their friends, defending their family, defending their home from attack. Otherwise, that's why invincible self-defense, but not one penny to go abroad and try to rule the world. But you see that everywhere. I think we have like 4,000 cemeteries or memorials for war and 0 for thinkers like Socrates.
That's a good point.
Sure, you did that. I mean, that speaks volumes, and it's not unique to the United States. You go to Greece, who do you think gets more tourist attractions? Alexander the Great or Socrates and Aristotle? Okay, Alexander the Great. They fight Macedonia over Alexander the Great. Socrates, nobody in Macedonia gives a darn about Socrates, right? So this is a profound change in our culture that needs to begin to turn in the other direction goes back to education, our civics training in the home. No, we want invincible self-defense, but otherwise our influence abroad is by example. But at home, it's liberty and justice that are everything. Liberty and justice, even-handedly applied, it's more important than building pyramids. It's more important than going to the moon or to Mars. It's that individual dignity and respect we give each individual, which is our greatness, the summit of what humans can accomplish.
Let me put forward a possible, I agree with everything you're saying. And I think over history, though, one alternative way to look at this could be that throughout, I think, let me put it this way to start. I think the humanity, if you look at a lot of the different examples you can have about the way government power structures treat generals, like all of the population of this country, at the very least, I think they think we want good, right? They wouldn't pretend to be liberty and freedom and democracy and saving people and lying about that if they didn't think we wanted that. I think inherently Americans, or just the human species, is a good at the end of the day. And I think it's, it's yin and yang. I think it's obviously both, but I think more so than the way it looks today. And I think that at least consider that over time, you have these moments of consciousness for whatever reason. You can get into more esoteric points about that, yuga cycles and whatever else, where people start to see through things. I think it's happening now. And I start to recognize, and recognize we're being, the veil's been pulled over our eyes. And I think throughout history, you can see moments that might represent the times when rationalization, like right now, is put forward to convince us why we shouldn't be wanting better. Like right now, Jeffrey, would you bring up my screen share there, the one with the red line at the top, just to go back to what Dennis said. And we made this point, I'm sure everyone's seen it, but just to really reiterate how important this is. Can you bring up that screen share for me, Jeffrey? It's the one on the far left. It's the one with the red line at the top. It's a Time article. I could just say it if it doesn't. Yeah. So remember, this is what Trump just said. It came out with his generals, that they're fighting a war from within. And so my point is that, and I think this has happened a lot. I made my point earlier about the sort of teeter-totter of it all and the rationalization. They did COVID, that's why Trump, and now he did this, that's why the Democrats, right? Is that right now they're trying to frame the idea that we are in fact at a war with the leftist Democrat terrorist network. And, we've all talked about this today. And I think the concern is that they're trying to convince people who are otherwise starting to want more. I recognize, we are ruining the Constitution. I know we debate on where that line is. I think there's more than I've seen doing this my entire career of people who are starting to go, but wait a minute, I want what Trump sold, but I don't think he's even representing that anymore. I wanted what the Democrats sold, but what they did with COVID was obviously, we're starting to break free from this. And this is about trying to convince us that we have to put that away and go back to war because it's in our interest. And I think throughout history, my larger point is that you'll always find these examples where they use what's in front of you to rationalize what's not in your interest. And the point is that maybe we are better than we allow ourselves to think. Either way, I think that's happening. I think we're being tricked into ignoring those things.
Going back to education is a point Bruce makes very frequently, not only educating the people who go to school, but maybe the people we educate who go into either study at the military academy, go to West Point or Annapolis or some other place, is that what should be required reading is the book written by the most decorated soldier up until that point in time in American history, Smedley Butler. It's a very small book called War is a Racket. It could be read in 2 hours. It's very precise and concise, and it's probably the best description of how much war profiteering, how profitable it is.
I've got a first edition right here.
And there's nobody there might be nobody who is a greater authority on this than him, given all the decorations he won for all the places he went, as he described to some extent, to being a gangster for capitalists, not for capitalism, because capitalism is a different concept. So capitalism is basically voluntary transactions, not coercion. Okay, if it's coercive in nature, it's not capitalist. Okay, so capitalism is purely voluntary system. So I implore everyone to read War is a Racket and share it with as many people as you can so they read it. Okay, make it part of a book club, make it part of a discussion, a book forum, or whatever. But it's really, he goes into details about how much money people made off profiteering of World War I, and the numbers are astronomical, and I don't think anyone would deny his credentials as a military person. So
it's amazing how many of those we have, though, isn't it? Like Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Our national debt went from 1 billion to 29 billion as a result of World War I. Could you imagine, in terms of magnitude of jump from 1 to 30 billion in one war? I mean, it's a staggering number. But I want to go back, and my view of thing is maybe a little more pessimistic than Ryan's, although you got to do the right thing. And now, I read volumes of everything. Read the Punic Wars, 16 years, Carthage, Rome. They never discuss ever what they're fighting for. They're just fighting for the sake of fighting. You know, Livy is a great writer. And you say, okay, you're writing the Battle of Cannae, and then you have Scipio Africanus and the Carthaginian peace. Why did you even care about the peace? What are you fighting for? Hannibal, his whole life from age 9 was just fighting wars. And I do think that we give the species too much credit, and to suggesting that there's anything behind or beyond warfare than just fighting for the sake of fighting. Hey, I feel good. I can dominate. I get an adrenaline high. Why do I ask why we're fighting? You know, it goes back, and it's always the same. When Richard Holbrooke was appointed special advisor to Obama on Afghanistan and Pakistan, the journalist asked him, what is the definition of victory? And he said without embarrassment, well, you know, it's like obscenity. We'll know it when we see it. He can't even define it. You know, you're supporting a war. You can't even define victory. I mean, can anybody say why we spent 20 years in Afghanistan fighting, running down a rabbit hole? What's it for?
Lithium, rare earth minerals.
We don't even have an articulation, right?
As I keep saying, it wasn't a war against terror. It wasn't a war on terror. It was a war of terror.
Right.
Okay? We committed a war of terror. Okay.
Zbigniew Brzezinski said Afghanistan was starting the balkanization of the Middle East. There's another point.
Yeah, that's it. And Brzezinski is a perfect example of that, or Henry Kissinger. We just fight and maneuver for power for its own sake. Why? Why should we get some adrenaline high saying, you know, we can demand Afghans do X, Y, Z? You know, only somebody who's a complete sociopath could get any gratification out of that. Stay home, cure your own diseases here.
Going back to my point, Bruce. None of this could be done if we had no standing army. Okay,
right.
We had with the original design, no standing army. If we understood why we had, as you mentioned, the point of the Second Amendment was not, you know, of course, people have the right to self-defense of their home, but the point of the Second Amendment was we'd have state militias of people who knew how to use muskets. Okay, so that if we were threatened, everybody was expected to defend their home and their homeland. Okay, that was for defensive purposes. They weren't recruiting people to say, let's go to Canada, let's go to Mexico, let's get on a boat and go to Europe or anything like that. Nobody was being recruited for those purposes. It was if their homeland was attacked, we would defend our own homeland, and everybody would have the capacity, interest, and skin in the game to defend their homeland. Okay.
Can I ask you both something? I know Jeffrey has limited time. Bruce has limited time. What do you think? I think we all very much agree with that, right? Is that the reality is that they, you know, like you said, if it's there, they're going to use it. They're going to rationalize why. But today, and you could even argue because of the U.S. kind of, you know, dominance of the foreign policy of the global situation, that other governments and militaries have kind of risen up in similar ways. Maybe it'd be like that either way. It's hard to know. But today, hypothetically, if we made that happen somehow, right? Americans said, done, get rid of the standing army. And you still had militias, so you still could defend yourself. Do you think that would be taken advantage of today with the way the world is? Do you think that, because that would be the argument of the government, I would either way. I don't agree with it. Either way, I think we should go back to that point. But do you think that, let's say, China or Russia or somebody might take advantage of that? Because that's what they would argue. What do you think about that?
No, that is preposterous. No one is going to, we have so many nuclear weapons, it would be suicide to attack us. That's why I call invincible self-defense. And at least we have at least a partial track record. Before we had standing armies, and they could go across the Atlantic Ocean, right? Napoleon could in Haiti, the British did in the Revolutionary War. We did not have European countries crossing the Atlantic to attack the United States, and we had no standing armies whatsoever. We had a few frigates. No, we're not being attacked. So that's a completely absurd argument. Even go back to the Spanish-American War. Were we being attacked? No. Even the blowing up of the Havana was a ship accident. It wasn't Spain attacking the United States. So I think the answer is clearly no. No country is going to attack the United States knowing we've got nuclear weapons that could wipe them off the map, in less than half an hour's time. As long as we're not trying to threaten their power base, they leave us alone, which is what we enjoyed for 100 years before we decided at the Spanish-American War, let's be an empire. And then we invited people to attack us because we're going over into their home base and creating threats to their own power base, which was quite stupid. And then we continue to do that today. But no, a foreign country is not going to take advantage of that. No way.
What do you think, Jeffrey?
Bruce, I think you have I'd like to continue, you and I, Ryan, for a few minutes, but you have a hard stop at 1:30. Bruce,
okay.
That interview.
I thank everybody, but I do think maybe the next time we'll have a week of Supreme Court argument, but let's have a session there, at least partly devoted to what are the issues of presidential power that are at stake, because that ought to be alarming to all of our audience. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Have a good one, Bruce.
I agree. I think we have enough. I think we have enough deterrence, and I think given our industrial capacity, even though people think we don't have much of industrial capacity, our value-added manufacturing is still the second highest in the world, and there's not a close third place. So for people who think we're not a manufacturing powerhouse, we still are. We're not as dominant as we were previously because of the emergence of China, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If we look how quickly we were able to arm ourselves in World War II, how quickly we were able to convert stuff for civilian purpose into military purposes, which was basically done by the private sector, to basically said, military, tell us what we need and we'll figure out how to get you what you need. And no, because of capitalism, no country is as good as diverting resources from one use to another as quickly as we can. So given between all the nuclear weapons we have, given the fact that when it comes to manufacturing capability, we're still, maybe second only to China, but our ability to adapt and reallocate resources is quicker than anyone else in the world, okay? Because if we abandon capitalism, that will no longer be the case. But as long as we have capitalism, okay, if the people sit back and say I'm willing to defer current goods, consumption goods, I'll keep my car longer because I'd rather build a tank or build something else, okay? We historically have been able to adapt quicker, faster, and better than any other country out there, and it was the one Japanese, I think, general who said, don't attack the U.S. because you don't want to awake the sleeping giant. Okay, right. So we might go to sleep. Okay, but once we wake up and once people are committed to do something to allocate resources, and we think a national interest is at stake, that the people believe that's the case. Okay, nobody can adapt quicker, faster, better than us. Okay, as long as we don't relinquish our support for capitalism. So no, I don't think there's any reason why any country, what do countries want to do? Countries want to sell stuff. They want access to our market. Okay, that's what they want. They want to sell stuff here. Okay, attacking the U.S. for what purpose?
Right. What's the interest in it?
What's the interest in doing it? Okay? And we had the domino theory, right? we lose Vietnam and the whole world will be red. Okay, it'll be communist. Okay, no, what happened was the world turned capitalist, not communist, even though we lost in Vietnam.
Right.
So
Right.
Vietnam is somewhat of a capitalist country now. So so capitalism is basically hit one. China has embraced some level of type of a form of capitalism. Russia has embraced all these countries who are socialists. The state will own everything. The state will allocate resources and stuff like that. They now all have stock markets. They all got billionaires. Okay. They're all supporting venture capitalists. They're all embracing some form of capitalism.
And now, as you pointed out the other day, now you see Trump and the United States government going in the opposite direction, going more towards fascism, socialism, communism. It's an interesting turn, even though it's Trump the one doing it. But it's been many of them. But another point that jumps to my mind in that, off the point of the if there was no standing army, is that now maybe this is why things are starting to come out, because I think, like we've seen with Trump, a lot of the issue is using things we already recognize as a problem and pointing to the problem because they already have planned to usher in a worse problem, is how I would look at it. But is the cyber warfare overlap, right? So let's just even say we've got nuclear weapons, no standing army. The point is now there's a risk of more, maybe cyber attack, or accessing nuclear capabilities with cyber attacks, which there's real evidence of that capability with Israel and plenty of others with infiltration. And so it's interesting is that now you get to a point where
who was the first country to aggressively use cyber attacks against another country?
That's a good question. Do you know? Who was it?
I think Israel's attack of Iran, right, was the first time.
That wouldn't surprise me. I didn't know that.
There's some question about whether the U.S. participated in that or didn't participate in that. So the Stuxnet virus. So we might have been the first to engage in this type of cyber espionage and cyber warfare. We got to assume people are doing it to us, and we're doing it to everyone. And maybe we're better at it than other people. Maybe other countries are better at it than we are. But everybody is doing it to everyone else.
Right.
So,
same with everything.
But the question is, what would be the motivation? If we had a foreign policy, like George Washington espoused, what would be the motivation for, if we were not threatening other people's interests? Okay, if we didn't have, all these military forces in over 100 countries throughout the world, have our submarines and navy all over the world, have nuclear ability to deliver nuclear weapons almost everywhere in the world, almost instantaneously. If we didn't have all that power that we use, the question is, would these same countries be doing stuff, that doing what they're doing now, because we involve ourselves in other people's. We're interventionists. So if we didn't intervene so much, what do we think? We can do all this intervention and think that there's no collateral consequences associated with our behavior, that our behavior doesn't provoke a response from the other party. So they're just supposed to just accept whatever we do and just accept it and not try and reciprocate, in a different way. It's a game theory, tit for tat. So you either cooperate, okay, which is always the best outcome. And once you deviate from cooperation, then the issue is do you get, an escalation, of game theory where it just goes from tit for tat, and where it doesn't matter how it started. It just goes from tat for tat for tit for tat for tit for tat for tit for tat until it escalates to a point where people say, maybe we ought to stop this game because it's getting out of hand. So,
well, the U.S.'s argument has always been, as we know, which is, maybe to some degree that was the reality, but today clearly not, is they're out there doing it for good reason, right? We're fighting for freedom. And everybody knows that's not true. And it's become such a cartoon today that it's an insult to everybody that they, it's like I keep saying with a lot of the conversations of foreign policy, is that you're out there not just doing the bad thing, you're doing the bad thing and then asking for praise. It's like the worst kind of evil that I can see today, and it's everywhere you look. So like to your point is, they're out there. We've talked about the maps around Iran, for example. How dare Iran put their country so close to all the military bases? You're encroaching on everybody's everything and acting like you are the one saving everybody. It's causing the kind of the retaliation that they use to justify their presence. It's a lot of what these countries do today. So, I agree. I think if you removed this presence, if you went back to what Bruce is saying, the march of the mind, not empire, I don't see, to your point, any real motivation for why a country, nukes or not, to be honest, why they would think it was in their interest to invade, even, for conquering purposes. Like, what is the real benefit to losing that much with the kind of, it doesn't make any sense to me. Certainly possible. I'm sure the government would make that argument, but with nukes included, there is no argument. I agree. They wouldn't happen.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any compelling interest with anything. There's one other point I'd like to go over quickly before we go today. I think they're related. I could be wrong. The Trump administration is putting pressure on, and successfully, to have both Apple and Google to drop the app that was letting people aware where ICE was going. Okay. Why do I think it's important that people be aware? I don't think it really was because we don't really have a lot of, in spite of the government says 1,000% increase or whatever, we're not getting stories of all these ICE agents being hospitalized or being dead or shot at or anything like that. So we're not getting any of these stories that they really, that there's been real physical harm done, to ICE agents.
That number's not true.
There's really no evidence of that. So what we do have, and that's why I want to show this other video, is why is it important that we know? It's important we know so we can document their behavior, okay? So it's not that there's not really a lot of stories. The people who are impeding them from doing their job are getting arrested. So I think most people are not there to impede it because they're going to jail. They're being treated pretty rough and they're going to jail. And I think most people don't want to go to jail. And so I don't think many people are there to impede, not that some are impeding, okay, or some are at least trying to make the job a little more difficult. But what a lot of them want to do is document what is going on.
Right.
Okay. And if we don't know where they are, it's harder to document. Okay. We do know from the video that I think we showed it, didn't show it, I can't recall, that in the video when they went outside to arrest the mayor in Newark, okay, that ended up also arresting the congresswoman. Before they went out, the person in charge told them to turn off their cameras. Okay, so they didn't want to record what they were about to do. Okay, they were inside the perimeter. They were inside the area. The mayor was already outside. Okay, and they were told to go outside and arrest the mayor after having some conversation. And when they made that decision, they said, turn off the cameras. Okay. Of course, nobody's asking the question, why did they need to turn off the cameras? Right. You would think that they'd want to do it transparently and have the cameras, but we know the reason why. So, so why is it important that we have people documenting their behavior? And is this last video here?
Yeah, that should be the one right there.
Get it to the stage here. Okay.
Get out the fucking elevator!
Wow.
Who is that?
Wait, where are you I think we need the doctor.
Yeah. We love you for all. Take care. We're here for you.
Yeah. No, I got it. What do you mean? No, I got it if you want help.
You want to go with the...
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, if you want to help with it right now, and we'll pick up.
Now, what was a possibility of what could be happening if that video didn't exist? Right. We might find this person in the neck brace being arrested for obstruction of justice. Okay. Right. So, and the woman who was pushed first, who then bumped into him, and then he hit the ground and she went to the ground, they would be committed obstruction of justice. And what they were doing, she was not trying to force her way into the elevator. She just had a camera. They didn't want the recounting, and you saw how aggressively he was pushed. Now, do you think they're behaving this way because they've been told that they can get away with this behavior and that the government has their back? Okay,
100%.
Of course, this is the behavior. Okay, this is the behavior Trump likes. Okay. You do me once, I get you 10 times over. So you spit, we hit. Okay.
Right.
So this is his mentality. So this mentality, and if you think about, Hexit thinking he's Patton, in front of that big American flag, thinking he's George Patton. Okay. So what a travesty if he thinks he's going to do his Patton imitation, like he can correlate himself with General Patton. So
these people are desperate for legacy. Every one of them are I call them the junior team. I think we've talked about this.
This is what they describe warrior culture. This is the warrior culture they want to build. And who is it against? Americans who do nothing.
Right.
Okay. These people were just accounting. They were just recording what was going on. Okay.
Well, let's talk about the
people recording their behavior. Okay.
Let's talk about the legality of, so regardless of the circumstance, you get the typical partisan, he's faking it. Really it's irrelevant. It just emphasizes the reality, whether he fell over and got up and he was fine. The point is that what they're doing is lawless, rampantly lawless, right? That's exactly what we've talked about. And that is being, like you said, not just allowed, that's being coaxed, it's being fanned. You have Noam and the rest of them out there with this mindset, whether they're part of the lie or actually buy into it, I don't know, of saying it's all secret, illegal, Democrat, terrorist, whatever. Like, anybody trying to do that is out there to kill you because they're secretly trying to kill everybody who's ICE. It's the 1,000% number, for example. Anybody can look into it for themselves, go as deep as you want. The only place that comes from is Tom Homan mumbling that on some show. There's no data to back that up. And in fact, every data you could find does not in any way suggest that that's the case. And I don't even see an increase, quite frankly. That's clearly what we've talked about is the rise in response because of lawless action. And I don't even mean violence. I mean, people like you're saying who just go, wait a minute, what's going on? Show me a warrant. Who are you? And getting punched or windows bashed in or opening fire on cars like that family we talked about. And by the way, we talked about that in a later episode. It turned out later in court that they admitted lying about whether they were hit. Remember we talked about that story, right. Jeffrey? They admitted there was no injury and the guy still went to prison. They're so lawless at this point that it's I think designed to destroy a lot of different things in this country, but it not just being allowed by the people in charge. They're hiring. These are basically bounty hunters. These aren't even necessarily like long-term federal employees. So these people are just out there doing they're drunk on power. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I want to leave my last word, and then I'll give you the last word, Ryan. But my last word is, again, I'm going to implore everyone. If you're on a grand jury, if you're on a jury, and you're viewing a case brought by this Department of Justice or any Department of Justice, but this Department of Justice has exhibited a level of bad faith that, I don't think I've seen in my lifetime. Unless they bring a really compelling evidence, do not give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay. Acquit everyone unless the evidence is really compelling. And if evidence not only has to be compelling, you have to think that the justice is being applied equally to everyone, as opposed to just being applied to people who are your enemies while you're giving, a free pass to people who are your friends. So, I might go as far as saying if somebody's committed a nonviolent crime, then I would, and until there's an investigation of Holman and his $50,000. Okay. So until there's an investigation of that, I think the way to enforce an investigation is just saying, I'm just going to quit everyone who has, I'm not going to allow the government to bring any charge against anyone if I don't see any real, compelling evidence of violence committed. So if somebody was blocking the way and then they got pushed aside violently and handcuffed, okay, let those people go. Okay. They're not a threat to society. Okay. One person, because many of these times the people can just go around that person. They don't want to go around the person. They want the person to move. Okay. They want the person to follow their orders.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
If somebody's really blocking and impeding somebody's way in a way that they can't go around, okay, so that they can't get their job done, that's one thing, okay? But if they can get their job done only by moving 1 foot to the left or 1 foot to the right and going by, okay, then they could, but the person wants to then do his power trip or her power trip, by putting the person in handcuffs and detaining them, and then figuring out all the charges that they can bring against them, to put them in jail for as many years as they want to try and put all these years because they want to intimidate society. We can stop that. We can stop that by just saying no, okay? No to the indictment, no to a conviction, or if to a conviction, convicted to a much lower crime, okay? That seems to be more just rather than the unjust type of applications of the law until we start seeing an equal justice. And we shouldn't have the person who is the face for this policy, Miller and Holman, okay? Until Holman's investigated, okay, he should be judged. He should he should be subject to the same standards he wants to apply to everyone else. It's just not acceptable, okay, that right now we have no one out there. He's never denied about the $50,000, and nobody seems to want to ask him questions on this $50,000, that he took in some sort of paper plastic bag or something like that, okay? And somehow we're supposed to think that's a legitimate transaction, and we don't really know what he was getting paid to do, and he doesn't seem to want to talk about it other than just saying he's not a criminal, okay? Right. And the reason he can say that is because nobody's going to investigate it, okay? We can enforce an investigation. And one other thing, I don't know whether this is true or not. One other thing, I do understand that one person, I read somewhere that there's conjecture on one of the reasons why the House doesn't want to convene again, is that one of the person in a special election, a Democrat, was won in Arizona or something like that, one state. But now there's one more Democrat on which has reduced the margin in the House. And from what I heard on a report or read somewhere, was that if that one person gets seated, that there might be a vote now to then release all the Epstein files, and that one of the reasons they don't want to meet and convene is to swear in this person so they can hold another vote and maybe reveal, the Epstein files. So This is a lawless regime, and we can start putting a stop to it by not letting it get away with being lawless, by just refusing to indict or convict the people they are persecuting.
I agree. Now, again, like you said, it does seem to be very up in the air, and it's hard to really define some of these inner points. From what I saw, at least from what Massey posted, is that they already have the 218, because there's already, the person had already basically said that they were willing to vote that way, and then Johnson went to recess, and now he's extending it well beyond what it currently is. Should they come back right now, the argument is they already have the votes, and that'll go to pass. But I'm worried that this time being left open is where Johnson and the rest of them are trying to knock away one of those Republicans who are voting for it. And should they knock away one, then they won't be able to pass it. And I think that's what I get the sense of, but I agree. I think we'll have to wait and see how it goes forward. I do think we both agree that the gap, keeping this going is very much in the interest of stopping that vote. But to echo what you were saying, I think, just the idea of your personal power out there, the individual, it's right now, everything that's happening is about, in one very clear way, about learned helplessness, like convincing us that we're not capable, powerful, of anything without the government, without, some power, without the left and the right and them making decisions for it. It's just not true. And that's where, like, as Jeffrey's rightly today pointed out, jury nullification is just one very important thing that's stolen from us, that exists, that we're not told about, that shows you that crack through the door that you really are the powerful one. And the same thing, like I said, about abstention or plenty of other things. And so I think it's really important that we lean into that, educate ourselves, and stand up for that. And I'll end with the point about the elevator. Again, just to remember that the other point is just, constitutional rights, the reality of how that's even possible, that these people just are immediately on the violent tactic point because you must be a left guy trying to identify us, or the ICE app. And how dare we know where people are who were supposed to be identifying themselves, who were supposed to be aware who they're creating the allowance for the removal of things that are the reality of the law because of bad Democrat or whatever. And so every one of these things chips away at your constitutional rights. And that's what we're trying to talk about today, in this show, every single week, is how that's happening from both sides. So thank you again, Jeffrey. Always a great conversation, brother. And I'll look forward to next time.
Thank you. Have a great day, Ryan. And thank you all who are watching and commenting again. All your comments and your participation are really greatly appreciated by all of us. So thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Thanks, guys.